digesting everybody else who had ever been there and measured this particular doorway or that particular step, or et cetera, and summarized that into what he called raw mathematics. And he called it Ra, sun god Ra, in honor of the fact that it was derived from the Egyptians. But it really is what we'll call universal math. It turns out that there are two key ratios that if we look around at living things and planets and galaxies and atoms, that there are structural ratios that I think the structure was there first, but when you analyze it mathematically, these ratios show up. And one of them is called phi, or phi, which is the golden mean. And this was something that we saw in the Da Vinci Code when they talked about these Fibonacci sequences. Like if right now you look at your own hand and you look at the length of the first part of your finger where the fingernail is and call that 1 unit, and then you compare that length to the next part of your finger, the difference between the two, the first one is 1 unit, the next one will be 1.618 times longer. And the same thing will happen if you look at the next part of your finger and compare that to the next section down to your palm. That'll be 1.618 times longer than that. If you bend your finger, you'll notice it starts to make like a spiral, which we call the Fibonacci spirals. It's like snail shells and ram's horns, and this shape, and it's the same shape in galaxies. And so we're built. Whoever created us in this third dimension used this ratio as a constant, and it's throughout art. Like if you look at the most beautiful faces, the ratio between the lips and the length of the nose, or the width of the nose, or how far apart the eyes are apart versus the skull, it's all, the most beautiful people have all their phi ratios perfect. And this is aesthetics. It permeates everything, and it's mathematics. How could this be? But it is. The other one that's reflected, and this is all in the pyramid mathematics, by the way. I'm sorry, this is how I got there. So the pyramid mathematics analyzed by Bateman said that these ratios were significant to the architect. The other one is pi, which remember from, junior high mathematics, pi being pi r squared. Well, pi reflects a ratio called 3.14159, and this is another what we call irrational number. They don't resolve. If you try to write it decimally, it goes on forever. And this is all about spherical geometry. So if you go back to the beginning of the Big Bang and you just say, boom, there's the Big Bang, that vibration, that event traveled omnidirectional or spherically in all directions simultaneously, and it made a big ball. Well, that big ball expanded and hit other balls and created other stuff. So creation is that way. And as it turns out, this spherical geometry and the pi frequencies, which I'll get to in a second, that there's frequencies that are hooked onto this stuff, are actually correlate with brain waves and our electrical system in our body. So the builders of the pyramid understood this and built this monument to mathematics, and has other properties too, of course, that they understood that we are literally, the third dimension is based on pi and phi. Well, at the end of Bateman's book, he told me there were frequencies described by this, and I went, whoa, how would you get frequencies from a building? Well, ultimately what he was talking about is the wavelengths that would be created by the dimensions of the structure. And so I went out to his house one day with a little electronic keyboard, and I dialed up on a little sampler, Elise's keyboard. It had a little piano sound up. Now, when every musical instrument has been made since the year 1925, the industry standardized it so that there was a frequency that was the same for all of them, so they were all tuned with each other. And that frequency is 440 cycles per second, so we call it A440. But Bateman says, no, that's not the right one. He says, you got to do something right around 424. So he dials up this frequency and oscillator. I'm listening to it and going, and then the note from the piano, I have to make it flat. So I have to lower the frequency or the pitch of the piano to match the frequency that he's telling me is one of the notes. So I do that. And then I sit there and I play the piano sound. And when I listen to it, I go, golly, this sounds like a 17th century piano. Now, I don't know what a 17th century piano was, but it was just my intuition. And he goes, you're right. And I go, what do you mean you're right? And he says, I'm telling you, this was the tuning in those days. So I went on the internet and I did my research, and sure enough, the first tuning fork that was invented in the year 1711 by a fellow named John Shore was tuned to a frequency of 423.5 cycles, within a half cycle of this frequency that the pyramid describes. I So this means that Mozart and Handel and all those great 17th century composers were playing on instruments that were tuned to these frequencies and composing. Well, now that I figured this out, I go, well, this is cool, but so what? Well, I sat down and I started to compose a meditation CD. And one night, I was going to do it in the standard 440. So one night, I went ahead and I retuned it, and I started to compose with the instrument tuned to this 424, which are, for our musician friends out there, you would go minus 64 cents flat from A440 to make your A424. And I started to compose, and I had the most unbelievable creative burst of energy. I wrote 3 songs in 3 hours with no errors, no mistakes. It was like I was an instant genius for a minute. And it worded out. And it was like, you know, this is the stuff we used to try to do drugs for, to get to this place, and it just, the frequencies of the music put me there. It put me in this brain state. Well, I told this to a very good friend of mine, a fellow named Dr. J.J. Hertock. He's the author of a book called The Keys of Enoch. And he agreed with me, and he says, Alan, let's prove this. I've been on this thing about resonance in ancient structures for a long time. So he sponsored a trip, and we went to the Mayan temples, and I actually measured the resonance of over 200 Mayan temples and backyards and courtyards and stuff like that, and created a database of frequency resonances, which will actually be published by the University of Mexico City. And over half of them were in the same frequencies that Bateman was talking about, was part of the pyramid. Well, with that success, we actually got a sponsor, and we went to Egypt, and I rented the Great Pyramid. I figured, okay, Bateman was theoretical. I'm going to go prove this. So we went there, and actually we rented the pyramid for 2 hours privately, and I got the place totally quiet down, and I went in there with my computers and my recording equipment, and I played a thing called pink noise, which is all frequencies simultaneously, into the King's Chamber, and then made a recording of what happened to the frequency response of pink noise being played in there. So it changes the resonance, or it reveals the resonance of the rooms. And man, I couldn't believe it, but this 424 business was the most significant frequency in this A-note range described by the pyramid. And you think about, what was the purpose of that King's Chamber in the pyramid? Well, that was the graduation room. That was the transcendent room. When you graduated from the Egyptian Mystery School, they let you go up there, now that you've learned about all your spirits and your afterworld, stuff like that. And they left you there overnight. And you would sing or hang out or lay down in the sarcophagus. And when I went there and I laid down and did my toning, I'll tell you, I went right out of my body. That thing is rigged to do this transcendent experience. And these frequencies are part of that transcendent whole experience. So now what I've done is I've determined that if we retune our music from this 440 business down to 424, it enhances the qualities of music. And I actually patented and created a technology on the website ramusic.com or rawmusic.com, where anybody could upload their Beatles or their Sting or their recordings of opera, and a digital pitch changer is built into it, and you can actually get a copy of the song or the music transposed. And if you like what happens, you can buy a copy for 99 cents. So it's like a little vending machine on the internet to change the frequencies of all the music that's been created to date, tuned to 440, into the more healing and wellness frequency of 424. And then shortly I'll add another feature. We'll be able to do A equals 432, which is the phi-based frequencies. So the 424 is really for the mind and the spirit, whereas the 432 business is really for the body. So if you're going to work on muscles or backs or spines or livers, the stuff in the range of the 432 is good. But I was really excited about this idea of mind and spirit, because I really think the spirit is senior to the mind runs the body, and the body is then the sort of the wheels in the transmission that gets us around in this third dimension. So that's where it all started, and so the raw music is the beginnings of modifying or making awareness to frequencies in music for the purposes of artistic appreciation, as well as moving on into what we talked about with the Sama convention or the Sama symposium, making it really an integral part of medicine and therapy.
Well, this is all incredibly exciting stuff. When you were talking about the chamber, I really got this image of like a launching pad. You know, that this was, that this was like the transporter room on the Starship Enterprise. You know, you hang out.
It truly is interdimensional.
Yeah.
And they understood this a long time ago, long before our computers and our analysis, whatever. These guys knew precisely how big to make this room, and it's made out of these huge pieces of granite, and the seams and the stones are like wafer thin. I think you might be able to get a piece of paper between these stones. They're cut precisely, and there's tooling in there. There's no way these guys did this with copper chisels and hammers. There was something else going on there, Robert.
Pretty significant stuff. You know, I know a little bit about Wes, based on some of the stories that you shared with me, and he's not some kind of run-of-the-mill guy who just decided to kind of get in on this stuff over the weekend on a lark. I mean, Wes Baden is actually a pretty heavy cat, and maybe you can share with the people a little bit about Wes's background and what makes him so integral and interesting to this whole story.
Well, the interesting part of the story, and I shared this with you, is in the 60s, Wes set up an organization in Silver Lake over in Hollywood. He called the Mind Institute, which was the mental investigation of new dimensions. And he was really telepathic, and he was a mathematical genius. He had only a high school education, and he came up with the best with him. In fact, his buddy Scott used to give him books on mathematics, not to teach him anything about math, but just for him to learn the vocabulary of mathematics so he could communicate what he was talking about to other people. Well, during these lectures at the Mind Institute, Wes got into this whole subject of UFOs. And he would actually schedule field trips where he would take people out to the desert and say, there's going to be a UFO going to fly over. And guess what? They saw UFOs. It was amazing. Well, this is like early 60s, and the attendees to his lectures, curious enough, was Gene Roddenberry and his whole staff of writers that were about to create this television series Star Trek. And the whole concept of the United Federation of Planets and the Prime Directive, which is that as another civilization, you can't disturb the development of a planet. These are all Wes's concepts. He wrote a book called Knowledge from the Stars back then. And it's all in there. Everything that's Star Trek is in Wes's source. And just to show what kind of a guy he is, at a certain point, Roddenberry approached Wes and his wife and his daughter and said, we want to make you part of this television series. And Wes goes, oh, no, this is for free. This is just truth. Don't pay me for that stuff. And he literally passed on being a very wealthy man and part of Star Trek to just go in his own pursuit and his own path.
Right.
Most should go, this guy was nuts. Why would he do that? But he was a man that marched to his own drum, did his own thing. And eventually the whole UFO business got a little too wacky for him in Los Angeles, so he then moved out to the desert and spent the rest of his life pretty much a hermit, doing his studies and his mental investigations and his telepathy. Unfortunately, he passed away a year ago, February. So I have a collection of his writings and a lot of interview tapes with him, and part of my mission is to really let the world know who this guy was and fortify the things he shared with me and then share them with other people.
In addition to Roddenberry and his production team, there were some other guys that were in attendance in the audience as well, right? That's
true. There was government agents there. In fact, there was guys that showed up from the FBI, and you could always tell who they were, he said, because they always had the suits on. So Wes, in his own personality, just went ahead and he says he actually reserved seats, and he put little pieces of paper on the chair that says reserved for the FBI. Made them welcome and put them right up front, and he was just so generous. He just shared this with everybody. It was just, when